Many Minecraft SMPs have rose and fell over the years. Some public servers like Hypixel and PvP Legacy, and some more famous SMPs like the Dream SMP and Hermitcraft, to name a few. I myself have both ran a server and been a member of several SMPs. I thought I would make a video talking about my thoughts and experiences with SMPs, as well as talk about the science I've found on why some SMPs work and why others seem to die so quickly. Towards the end of the video, I also want to talk about the plan I'm working on going forward, so please stick around for that. Before I begin, I just would like to say, these are just my thoughts and experiences. Please don't take this as fact or discredit anyone else's experiences. While I have recently become more aware of earlier SMPs such as Hermitcraft, one of the most well-known SMPs was the Dream SMP. The Dream SMP started in May of 2020 as a small server for Dream and his friends to play on. Around this time, Dream had become very popular from his manhunt videos, so he and his friends already had a large viewer base to jumpstart the SMP's popularity. Eventually more players were added to the SMP, such as Tommy Innit, Tubbo, Wilbursoot, Jack Manifold, Fundy, and so many more. The server started as simply just a fun server for friends to get together and hang out until lore started to form. The original lore was formed naturally though, without writing, first with Tommy and his discs, L'Manberg, The War, and so on. Most of the early lore was improvised, or if there was any writing, it was very light. Later on, as the SMP began to gain more and more traction, lore became more heavy, more members were added, and the SMP blew up. Yes, pun intended. Fascinated by the story, the world, the players, many viewers decided to make SMPs of their own, myself included. Eager to recreate the fun SMP like this one, millions of SMPs were born. But just as quickly as they were created, thousands of SMPs died. There are some flaws in how SMPs work, some of which have to do with mixing the wrong kinds of players together, and some general issues all SMPs, even big SMPs, face. I personally see more lore servers than I do non-lore servers, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I myself enjoy lore servers, but they, like all kinds of servers, have their flaws. One flaw I've seen is the lack of interested players. This is not to say there's not players who are originally interested in the lore, but I've found that over time, some members seem to fade off or no longer seem interested in the story anymore. Sometimes this has to do with the lore quality, how heavy the lore is, and even that it simply is too hard to keep track of and gets overwhelming. Which also leads into another flaw, lore conflict. I would be lying if I said I haven't run into several lore conflicts. Everyone has great ideas, but some of them clash or debunk each other. And while using the yes and technique can work in some improv situations, lore planning is not always one of them. And trying to navigate to make sure everyone's lore is to their satisfaction and gets their chance to shine is very difficult. That being said, this also has issues with the server becoming simply a story, and no longer a world people can play on just for fun. Lore is so fragile that even having something moved or a change in gear can sometimes break immersion. The game simply becomes too hard to play, and then becomes only existence for story. This becomes extremely dangerous when faced with scheduling conflicts, or an important character leaving, which often leads to the server dying. Anarchy servers are servers with little to no rules. Most of the time, things such as griefing, stealing, and killing other players are allowed. This leads to problems for some players, especially those who are new or inexperienced. Or the opposite, players being too much of an anarchist, excessively killing players, looting and griefing bases every chance they get, sometimes causing arguments and bullying. And the inability to make or keep progress can be very frustrating. I personally had the issue of much stronger players killing me repeatedly, and others had issues with their bases and builds they've worked so hard on getting griefed. You all have seen how chaotic Tommy was on the Dream SMP. Despite the lore, there was still stealing, killing, and griefing, honestly quite a lot actually. In the pre-Awakening SMP, I tried to recreate that chaos by making a server that is both mild anarchy and lore. And let me tell you, It didn't work! It stayed okay for a while, and then we had issues with non-experienced players who wanted to do lore, getting killed, or unable to keep up with the players who wanted PvP. We also had problems with people griefing lore builds and stealing items that were important to lore. We came up with a set of new rules making it so that lore was protected, but most builds were part of lore, meaning there would be no griefing allowed basically anywhere. And even with those rules in place, we had players who would disregard the rule, or didn't realize the builds were part of story, and lore was either ruined or a hassle to fix. No matter what kind of server it is, there's still some critical flaws that every SMP faces. One of those flaws are active players. Many players may start off playing on the server regularly, but over time, some players become busy with life, school, work, etc., which also leads into other players losing interest in the game as more and more players begin to fade away or are unable to play when other people are online. Another thing I found to be an issue had to do with mods. If we had a server with mods, we had players who disagreed on what mods should be added, as well as some players who struggled to run mods to begin with. Some players left because the server no longer was fun to them because of the mods that were added or not added, and others were basically forced to not play because they couldn't run the mods very well at the time. After talking about all these critical flaws, you may be wondering, so then how did the Dream SMP work so well? How did they avoid these for so long and become so successful? I think the reason it worked so well and survived for so long simply has to do with the fact that some of these flaws were actually avoided completely. Whether it was intentional or not, I have no idea. But they also had a few advantages that other SMPs don't. But let's start at the top. First off, the lore quality was pretty good. The lore originally started as just friends messing around, doing bits, and then eventually escalated into a whole scripted thing. As for lore conflict, I honestly didn't see any, or if there were any, they weren't very major ones. Also, most of the members seemed pretty naturally good at improv. They would go with whatever was happening and make the most of it. Planned lore later in the story also was sent to the whole server, I think, so everyone knew what was happening, making it easier for others to plan around pre-existing lore. Many members also seemed very dedicated and would play regularly despite their schedule, which also, for many, were easier due to the fact that they could come home after school and play, or this was their job. Making content was how they paid the bills. They also had the advantage of lockdowns, giving people more time as well as the longing to find a way to cure the boredom. They also had a lot of members, so there was almost always someone online and others to interact with. For the anarchy, I honestly think it all had to do with trust, professionalism, as well as keeping their temper when things went south. Or using their temper for content! Things could be stolen or griefed, players killed for fun, but they mostly knew where the line was, and when they were crossed, they knew how to roll with it and move on. Now I want to talk more about my experience with SMPs. And I just want to start off saying, SMPs are great. I had so much fun in all the SMPs I've been a part of, and honestly, it's really sad to see so many of them die. That's what pushed me to make this video, because I want to figure out just what causes so many SMPs to die, and why so quickly. I started the Pre-Awakening SMP in August of 2021, inspired by the Dream SMP. Tommy in it was my favorite perspective, so I wanted to leave open possibility for chaos alongside lore. Therefore, I made it a mild anarchy lore server. This was also around the time Tommy started the Origin SMP, and I really liked the concept of the mod. But seeing as I'd never run a server before and most of the members didn't know each other, I decided to make Season 1 vanilla, but planned for mods in Season 2. I wanted to give everyone the chance to get to know each other, as well as I wanted to get the hang of how SMPs work, let alone Minecraft on PC. Yes, I only barely started Minecraft on the PC before the SMP, okay? All I had before was Bedrock on the Switch. So from the very beginning, Season 2 was supposed to be the main SMP. But we'll get to Season 2 in a second. The SMP started similar to how I saw the Dream SMP start, where Episode 1 was just everyone messing around, not concerned about lore. Lore started to pick up naturally, and more started to happen on the server. Once lore became important, I did realize that lore is better planned with just key points and letting the rest fall naturally, rather than a whole scripted scene. For example, the episode where Quizix escapes prison at the trial was scripted a little too much. While the words were not scripted, the plan was for Quizix to avoid his sentence by escaping with help from the Enclave. In the first take, the courtroom explodes. You can see in my perspective, it was obvious that it was scripted. He says, "That's TNT," and I had a good 5 seconds to react and leave the room, but I just stood there, waiting for the TNT to go off, because I knew that was what was supposed to happen. In the second take, a wither was spawned, instead of making spawn a crater again. The wither was killed quicker than expected, meaning we all had a chance to gain on Quizix, while he tried to escape with Hacker and Psych. There was too many times where we could have easily caught him, but instead, because it was planned that he was supposed to get away, we just didn't catch him. What I think we should have done is we should have still kept the key point of Quizix breaking out, but we should have gone with the flow if we did catch up with him. From there, we could have come up with a different plan on how he escapes. That way we don't have a situation where the whole scene looks unnatural. But an example of what I would say were some of the best scenes were the Quizix encounters. Most of these were not planned at all. Quizix would just show up and our characters would have a reason to interact. I remember my reactions were so natural because I genuinely had no idea what Quizix was gonna do. We both improv'd those scenes. Now, not to say all planned scenes are bad, like some of the Bone White experiment scenes were scripted, but it was to a very light extent. We just had the key points and made sure we hit them and then ran from there. The finale was also scripted, but like I mentioned before, only key points. We knew Bone and Hacker were gonna duel, but we were going to leave the match natural. There was no set winner. The finale encounter with Quizix, I didn't know a lot besides just that he was gonna find me in the woods, I was gonna be knocked out, and I was gonna be in the end. We ran with the cinematics post-recording. So scripting can be good in moderation, but the more natural it is, the more smooth it's going to flow. We did come across issues with scheduling a lot though. One member in particular would either leave in the middle of lore, or not show up at all and then disappear from the internet for months at a time with no warning. Yes, Quizix, I'm looking at you. And with him being a big part of the lore, it became very difficult to progress the story without him. We had to shoot the finale video on 4 separate days. The first day being the original day, where someone didn't show up. But lore aside, I enjoyed all the memories we made. That first Resistance meeting, where we were mainly arguing about remodeling. We also didn't plan any of that, by the way, and that's the episode where Quizix began his villain arc and became the untrusted outcast. But anyways, I remember the spawn circle. I recreated the original one because it actually kind of started to feel like home. I get nostalgic every time I walk on Amethyst now because of the sound of the Amethyst Road. I remember there was this one time where Hacker and Waiting Spy were trying to steal one of my horses and burn down half of the Dark Oak Forest in the process. All of the bloopers were good too. There was just so much I loved about Season 1, though I will admit it was not always sunshine and rainbows. We also had a lot of issues with players repeatedly griefing Spawn, which was supposed to be the one place that was guaranteed protection. I didn't know how to use Spawn protection at that time. Anyways, Season 1 kinda died mostly due to the lack of interest, and it was time to wrap it up and start Season 2. Origins awoke. We had invited new players, installed the Origins mod and Terralith, and eventually added even more. This server actually started somewhat lore-heavy, at least for my character. Other players were playing naturally, meanwhile characters like Quizix, Hacker, Bone, and I were already getting into lore mode. Over time, though, a few did fall victim to the issue of not being able to play the game because of lore. Anyways, because of how many issues we had with griefing, we were stricter on the griefing rules and made it more of a lore server. The lore was going great until, again, the lore began to hinder most players' abilities to play the game outside of lore. And then once a few important characters to the lore left the server, the SMP quickly died once again. I've also been on other SMPs such as the Fluke SMP and the Misfire SMP. The Fluke SMP was fun while it lasted, but we had a lot of inactive players after a week or two. It was not really a lore server, but it was fun to hang out and meet new people. The Misfire SMP was more of a lore server, and I enjoyed it. I ended up being inactive though, due to starting a new job and just getting exhausted trying to adjust to a new schedule. But overall, I really enjoy being on SMPs, and I'm really sad to see so many die. I miss the memories, the group events, the chaos, the stories, and I'm always very eager to join new ones. So here's the deal. I enjoy SMPs, but they always seem to be dying. I have covered what I've found to be the reason, but it's not enough. I need to know. I need more information. I need more testing material. So, I have decided to conduct a series of experiments I'm calling the SMP experiment. Yes, creative, I know. I'm going to take the knowledge I've learned, as well as the knowledge I've yet to learn, and try a few different things. Like making 1 or 2 week-long SMP seasons, constantly adding new players so we have less of a chance of inactive players, a server where I as the admin make the lore on the world and the players find it, SMPs that run only during certain times of the year like summer, season-based SMPs with hiatuses, an SMP with a lot of players, and an SMP with very few select players, competitive SMPs where players must compete against each other on teams, SMP events where you, the viewer, can participate, and so much more. This experiment may take a very long time, but it may be worth it. I want to know if it's possible to keep an SMP alive for longer. How long can they last? Or are SMPs just meant to die? Are they supposed to make memories so you can look back at them and be grateful for the time you had? But in order for me to do this, I need your help. I will be joining different SMPs to gather more information, as well as hosting some. If you're in need of members for your SMP, or wish to participate in mine, please join my Discord server below. There, I will be keeping you updated and post when there's opportunities to participate. This is something I've been thinking about doing for a while, and I'm so excited to finally get started. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I haven't made a video like this before, so if you liked it and think I should make more like this, comment down below. I may make more in the future. Anyways, thank you again, and see you soon.